Road Building Programme and the transport section of the Zero Carbon Britain report. And Chris Todd, who is director of the Transport Action Network. He's coordinating a legal challenge to the Strategic Roads Programme, and he's supporting campaigns promoting sustainable transport. So without further ado, they're going to be speaking for about 15 minutes each, and then you all get the chance to ask questions, which you can do in person, or you can put the questions in the chat if you'd prefer to do that. The first part of this session is going to be on YouTube, but once the speakers have had their total of half hour, we'll be cutting off YouTube, so you'll be able to ask your questions. It's safe in the knowledge that it won't be on the internet forever. So we'll start with Lisa Hopkins.
Thank you very much, Kate, and hello XR Greenwich and everybody, welcome. I'm going to just share my screen and try and find my presentation, and then we'll start. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, brilliant. Okay, so my name's Lisa. I'm an associate for Transport for Quality of Life, a small transport consultancy. And tonight I'm talking to you based on about 9 briefings that we did with my colleague Lynn Sloman for Friends of the Earth a couple of years ago. And the starting point for this is the climate emergency and what we need to do in terms of transport policies to address that and the need for rapid action. So I'm going to do a pretty rapid gallop through the key points of 9 briefings, but all the briefings can be found on our website, and this presentation will be available after the talk. So first, let's give some context. Transport is the UK's single biggest contributor to climate change. In 2018, it represented about 1/3 of UK's emissions, and it's the only sector where emissions have increased since 1990 and not decreased. Emissions from transport have increased, and road transport, and particularly cars, are the biggest contributor, as you can see from this chart.
Det kanske snarare är ett internt.
Okay, so cars are the biggest contributor, but let's not forget about international aviation, which is a large and growing source of emissions. Aviation emissions have actually doubled since 1990. But today I'm going to focus mainly on what we can do about carbon emissions from cars. So all we need to do is switch over to electric vehicles, right? Well, this is the assumption that all policymakers and government make, and it's the prevailing assumption, and it's incorrect. Although we need to switch to electric vehicles much more quickly, the government's current policy is to ban new fossil fuel cars and vans in 2040, and they're consulting on bringing that forward to 2035 and earlier. That's not fast enough. We need to phase them out by 2030, but even that is not sufficient to stay within a Paris compliant carbon budget for transport. And this is because the majority of mileage over the next 10 years is going to be by fossil fuel cars, because it takes so long for the fleet to turn over. The average car, gets scrapped after 14 years. We've left it too late. So we need to cut mileage from all vehicles, particularly fossil fuel cars. So depending on the rate of uptake of electric vehicles, we estimate that we're going to need to cut mileage by between 20 and 60% over the next 10 years compared to now. So that's similar to the levels that we've seen during the peak of lockdown. So this is a massive challenge. It requires transformational, not incremental change. It's going to require restrictions on how much people can drive and fly. And we need to make travel without a car easier, more convenient and cheaper. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is we've got to transform public transport. And a public transport fit for a zero carbon world, it's got to be universal, so it's got to be available for everyone. It's got to be comprehensive, so we need good service levels in all areas. It's got to be low cost or free, and it's got to be green and zero carbon. So first of all, we need a massive transformation of our public transport system. So in Britain, outside of London, we have a deregulated, privatised, uncoordinated public transport system, expensive, multiple tickets, and poor or non-existent services that don't connect well. But if you contrast this with what happens in Northern Europe, in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Northern Italy, public transport system functions as a single coordinated system, coordinated by public transport governing bodies. They have overarching control of the whole transport system, rail, bus and trams, and they provide one network, one timetable and one ticket. And as a result, public transport systems are frequent, they're connected, and they run generally 7 days a week from early in the morning to late at night. So to achieve the same in Britain, we need to transform the governance of our public transport system. We need all local bus and tram services to be regulated by local authorities, and we need the railway to be a single entity operating under public control and in the public interest. And this is not just relevant to urban areas, even in rural areas like this photo of Austria, rail and bus services are fully coordinated and publicly governed. So as well as improved public transport, active travel has got to become not a nice to have, but a priority. And this not only reduces carbon, but has massive benefits for health and air quality as well. So we've got to transform our streets to make them safe for everybody walking and cycling, from a 6-year-old to a 90-year-old. So this is going to require rapid construction of networks of segregated cycleways in all urban areas, that radiating out into surrounding settlements. And the UK has lags behind lots of other countries in terms of its cycle infrastructure, but we can learn from Seville, which built 120 kilometres of segregated cycle paths in just 4 years. And walking and cycling mode share is now over 40%, and that's in a city that was considered too hot to cycle. We can also learn from Denmark, of course, who are building 750 kilometres of segregated cycle superhighways, which radiate 40 kilometres out from Copenhagen. So we need a similar programme in the UK as Denmark, building continuous segregated cycleways and footpaths alongside all single carriageway main roads for 15 kilometres either side of every settlement. So this would mean all settlements would link up with this network of safe cycleways and footways. And the growth of e-bikes also have great potential to reduce car mileage because they make longer trips possible. Around half of e-bike trips replace trips that would have otherwise been made by car. And they're used, as well as being used for longer journey, they also make cycling more attractive for a wider range of people. So women, older people, people with health or fitness problems. But improving public transport and opportunities for active travel, although necessary, are themselves not sufficient to get the reduction in car mileage that we need. And we need to constrain car travel. And there are various policy tools that can do this, fuel duty escalator, workplace parking levy that they've got in Nottingham. But we think the most potential is for a pay per mile eco levy for driving. And this is because we know from London that congestion charging, the road pricing is an effective way of reducing car use. It works. And we know from other countries, Singapore, Stockholm, Gothenburg, Milan, that it's an effective way of constraining car use. Secondly, you can vary, it's not a congestion charge, it's a pay per mile carbon pollution charge. So it's linked to distance and potentially engine size, but it's not a congestion charge. So you can vary it by location. So, possibly in rural areas without such good alternatives, the rate could be lower. And you can also, vary it by time of day. So this helps address the important principle of fairness, which is necessary to achieve acceptability. And all local authorities now have the power to introduce a road user charge, But other than London, no one has had the courage up till now. But if we can show that the income from that will be ring fenced and ploughed back in to invest in local services, cutting carbon and air pollution, there'll be more winners than losers, and many people will support it. In Stockholm and in London, the main winners were people on lower incomes, young people and women who all drive less and use public transport more. And we've got to remember, because this always comes up, this benefits lower income people who tend to be more dependent on public transport. And we have to get and improve public transport services in first before we introduce an eco levy. But this gives people more alternatives and options of how to travel. There's still a huge question though on how we win the media battle for an eco levy on driving, because new taxes are never popular. And we think the best way of winning that battle is to combine a pay per mile eco levy with free bus travel. So local public transport is already free in more than 100 towns across the world. Dunkirk in France made its buses free in autumn 2018, at the same time transformed its bus network. And 1 year later, bus trips were up 85%. Half of all new bus users previously drove. 1 in 10 new bus users sold their second car, and there was evidence that young people were postponing getting a driving license as a result. So this was an absolute game changer for a working class town that was culturally very attached to the car. And it was not introduced for environmental reasons, it was to help low income people get to work easily. So how can we fund all these necessary improvements in public transport and investment in active travel and make buses free? So firstly, the eco levy itself, we estimate could raise about £20 billion a year, which could be ploughed back into better services and new infrastructure. But we also need a reform of transport funding to make effective action on climate change possible. So we think we need to give powers to local councils to be able to raise more funds locally. We have one of the most centralised transport funding system in the world. So first of all, a public transport payroll levy. This is used by about more than 80% of France's urban transport authorities and funds more than half of their public transport infrastructure. So it's a small levy on employers, and employers accept that because it's providing better, public transport services for their workers and helping them get to work on time. Secondly, visitor lodging levies. In much of Europe, local authorities charge a small visitor levy of about €1 to €2 a night for visitors. In Switzerland, that's used to improve public transport and provide free public transport for visitors. And in towns and cities, we also need to capture a proportion of the windfall taxes that property and landowners get when their site increases in value, when planning permission is granted, or when new public transport infrastructure is built. And let's not forget how much money we're spending on roads each year. So the large expansion of the roads programme that's planned, and Chris will talk more about that, total expenditure on national and local roads is going to be approaching £10 billion a year. And given that we need to reduce traffic rather than increase it to meet climate objectives, we think that money should be reallocated to sustainable transport. So that 10 billion a year could provide local authorities in England with an additional 4 billion a year for public transport and 2 billion a year for active travel. There's no shortage of funding, it's just going in the wrong places. So all the ideas that we've presented here today are already being implemented in other countries. We don't need any new technologies. Of course, we need electric vehicles and some new technologies, but the solutions already exist. And with political will and leadership, they're all achievable. And as well as reducing carbon emissions, they'll provide a host of other benefits: cleaner air, improved health, quieter and safer streets, more convivial neighbourhoods, and a fairer transport system. So, although I haven't discussed all of these are the main conclusions from our 9 briefings. Make carbon reduction the government's top priority, bring forward the phase-out date for new petrol and diesel cars, bring rail and buses under public control with an objective of reducing carbon, set public transport service standards so everyone can live a decent life without a car, build strategic cycle networks alongside all main roads, bring in a pay per mile eco levy for driving while making public transport fare free, and give councils the powers to raise more funds locally to pay for their transport services and infrastructure. Transfer the budget for road building to sustainable local transport, and from a planning point of view, ensure all new development in urban areas is in urban areas and served by excellent public transport. So here's, I've just provided some additional links here, but thank you, and very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. And let's, without any further ado, go straight over to Chris Todd from Transport Action Network.
Hello, good evening. Thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm just going to share my screen, so let's hope that works. Okay, is that right? Great. I'm from Transport Action Network. We're a new organisation set up just last year. Basically, we help support many local groups and individuals around the country who are campaigning for positive solutions, walking, cycling, public transport, but also quite a few of them are fighting some very damaging local road schemes or national road schemes that are happening in their local area. You know, some of the big ones that we're supporting are Stonehenge, Liverpool. We obviously know Silvertown, but it's in a different stage to a lot of others. There's the Lower Thames Crossing, A27 Arundel, people might have heard about it over the last week or so. So we're doing that all of the time, and that's our primary focus. The reason we've ended up in a legal challenge with the government is that a lot of our work is supporting groups and trying to get them solutions to actually try and stop the road in their area, and that is incredibly difficult because the cards are sort of stacked against them with the government policy, with the system, and with the sort of momentum and political will behind road building. So we felt we didn't have a choice, and it was one of the best opportunities for helping many local groups around the country is if we could actually challenge the roads investment strategy, that would be perhaps the best way that we could actually support and help local groups. And you know, since we've launched the challenge, we've been overwhelmed with the sort of number of messages of support and welcoming of this. And I have to say, people like Lisa have also generously helped and supported us in that challenge. We're not just doing it alone. There's only 2 of us, and so we have needed other support to help make it a reality and to give us a half decent chance of actually trying to trip the government up over this and to make it see sense. I can't remember. So that's our legal challenge. At the moment, we don't know when that's actually going to be. It's likely to be around December or January, but we're still waiting to find out. And we've been, you know, this week and last week we've been busy submitting further evidence and statements into the court for that process. One of the problems we've got at the moment with traffic is it's being encouraged by the government. Not only do we have a problem, as Lisa's already outlined, that we need to reduce traffic, we need to reduce emissions, but actually government policy is driving it in the wrong direction, let alone what we need to do. And one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest drivers of that over the last few years has been the fuel duty freeze. That is basically costing the Exchequer about £9 billion a year. I mean, £9 billion is a huge amount of money that could do a huge amount of good and to help deliver a lot of what Lisa was talking about. But it's also resulted in around about the equivalent of 2.5 million extra cars on the road because of that incentive, effectively, economic incentive for people to drive, because it becomes cheaper every year because the duty isn't increased in line with inflation. So politicians don't seem to get this message. new roads equals new traffic. It's been a universal truth for as many years as I've been alive, I suspect, and if not longer. When you build a new road, people use it. It fills up, so you don't solve congestion. And politicians are very good at just looking at the little bit of stretch of road that they're talking about improving and saying, well, surely it'll improve emissions because on that stretch of road, the cars will no longer be static. Well, they might be right in that, but the trouble is looking just beyond the end of that bit of road, and you'll find that the traffic is snarling up. So all you do is you shift the congestion and pollution around. And so new roads do not solve pollution problems. They might in a particular location, but they will just shift that problem to somewhere else or disperse it over a broader area. I mean, a classic for bypasses is that actually the radial routes out to the bypasses often have massive increases in traffic to them, let alone the traffic that is encouraged, extra traffic that's encouraged to travel along the bypass itself. So this is the sort of, this is a key, I suppose, mental stumbling block for a lot of people, is that surely it's logical. You've got congestion, you've got a narrowing of the road. The logical solution is to widen it. So it's quite a difficult concept to get across at first, just straight away. So you have to sort of try and explain and work people through it. But it is more complicated. So it's a difficult thing, because the intuitive thing is to think, yes, unblock it, it's going to flow more freely, and therefore we're going to solve congestion and pollution. So we've got to fight that all the time, and it is an uphill battle. Then we come to the government policy on carbon emissions, as Lisa again has already outlined. The challenges that we face. The problem is the government is in complete denial. I mean, some of the evidence it's been putting forward in the challenge is quite astounding. In fact, it was an answer to a parliamentary question where we suspect that in actually giving the answer to Parliament to the question of, what are the emissions from the second road investment strategy, which is the roads programme for the strategic roads network, which includes over 50 listed schemes and many other smaller ones. They said it was some paltry amount of 0.28 megatons of carbon dioxide up until 2032 or thereabouts. What we've since discovered, it's likely that only accounts for about 5 schemes. So they haven't even added up all of the emissions from all of the schemes as they were asked that's what the question asked in Parliament. So potentially they have misled Parliament over this, let alone the fact that they are in complete denial that roads actually increase carbon and therefore cause problems. And that is a big issue. And it's obviously one of the key points that we're contesting in our challenge. And well, we shall see what the judges make of it. But to us, it seems absolutely astounding that they can be making these sorts of claims. Just to put it in perspective, that's only for user emissions. And I think one of the things I was going to just say about the graph that you saw from Lisa is that actually when you have you build new roads and it encourages extra traffic, well, even if you don't, the transport emissions are not just constrained to that big red block that you saw in Lisa's graph, because those are the user emissions. So that's only the petrol and diesel that's burnt when people are traveling up and down. It doesn't cover the construction emissions, which they put under business or somewhere else. And it doesn't cover electric vehicles who are drawing their electricity off a grid that still has some carbon in it, because that comes under the power generation sector. So actually, the full impact of carbon emissions from road transport is actually even bigger than we're talking about, because some of it is hidden in other sectors. Now, this is quite an unusual heading, but it's one I put in because it's particularly pertinent for London. It doesn't probably happen elsewhere. This is, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure a lot of you do, it's Hammersmith Bridge, and it's been in the headlines a lot recently. But in London, since the government is
virtually stopped subsidising, and I'm not counting the current situation, which is sort of exceptional. Since the government has stopped subsidising Transport for London, effectively Transport for London has to manage all its roads. It doesn't get any money or income from vehicle excise duty, and vehicle excise duty is now a ring fence for spending on the strategic roads network, of which there isn't any, or if there is, it's very, very little within Transport for London area. So it has to manage and pay for its roads from its total budget. Now, the only income it gets is from public, or the main income is from public transport and from business rates. So public transport is effectively subsidising car use because it's paying for a lot of the road network upgrades, renewals, and that's part of the reason why infrastructure such as Hammersmith Bridge is falling apart, because Transport for London hasn't got the funds to properly maintain it because it is not being given the funding to fund the road network. Investment is incredibly important in terms of dictating our travel choices, and we've talked about government investment in terms of road building. Lisa's talked a lot about the sort of instruments that you can use to raise revenue to invest in public transport and active travel. There's also another big significant tranche of funding that is influencing travel behaviour in the country, and that comes through from development. Now, this wonderful place, he says sarcastically, near Wokingham, is, as you can see, car-based. It's not going to be very attractive for active travel. It's based on, effectively looks like some sort of potential ring roads or link roads, and I don't know if those other funny shapes are future development outlines or just happen to be that and something else. But that development, as you can see, is just going to generate lots and lots of cars. There's not that much green space within it. Most of it is tarmac and car parking. And the problem is there's lots of this happening at the moment. And it's happening because our planning system, is not taking transport seriously. It's not properly integrated with planning. So when land allocations take place, they don't take place on the basis that a site is well served by public transport, or if it's not, that it can be, and that would be economic viable to deliver the sorts of services that Lisa was talking about, not the sorts of services we see in this country where a few buses a day are considered a public transport service. I mean, they're absolutely useless to most people, and really they're sort of an insult to people's intelligence. The other thing that often happens is that developers will they will tick the box of supporting public transport. It's got public transport links, and this is particularly true for out of town retail or other developments. And so they pay for the bus service for the first 3 years, maybe 5 years. And then, of course, as soon as the funding runs out, because the whole development is being based around the car, it's not economically viable to continue with that bus service, and it gets cut. And then you end up in a worse situation, no bus, all car. And that is happening all over the country at the moment. Now, at the moment, there is a consultation on the planning white paper, which sounds terribly dull, but it is incredibly important. And one of the key things that we're urging people to do is respond to that, and to, if you do nothing else, make the point that planning and transport need to be properly integrated, and priority needs to be given to transport considerations within the planning system, not housing numbers, which is the current way of it working. Because, as our favourite person in Parliament at the moment, Public Grant Shapps, and he said some really good things. For a Conservative minister, he's actually said some astonishing things, if you like. Whether he sticks to them we'll have to see. But this is a statement he made back in March. Public transport and active travel will be the natural first choice for our daily activities. We will use our cars less. That is completely at odds
with what's come out in the consultation on planning from the Ministry of Housing and Local Communities and Local Government. And it's classic government not joined up thinking. This is the reason we've got so many problems. So we've got to tackle this. It's not just within the Department for Transport. In fact, the Department for Transport looks quite radical when compared to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and that's saying something. So how are we actually going to tackle reducing carbon impact and reducing traffic? This is a diagram that's put together by Decarbonate, which was working in association with Local Government Association. It produced a series of briefings for them, and it's basically split it into 3 ways of how we need to tackle the problem. So the first one is on the left. It's avoid. So we travel less. So that's using online facilities such as we are using tonight to reduce the need to all us to travel to a central location. It's very much about better land use. So you're creating communities. You're not just creating housing, because one of the problems is at the moment it's all just we've got to have housing numbers. So they'll create these huge dormitory areas, and then people have got to travel miles and miles. And in the worst instance of we've heard reported is in one new settlement, local people have to drive 7 miles to be able to pick up a pint of milk. So that is something that we need to address, and that needs to be addressed at both a national government level and a local government level. Once we've reduced what we need to travel, we've then got to look at shifting what we do travel onto more sustainable modes. So that's the active travel, that's the buses and rail. And then what we've got left after that, we then look at shifting to electric vehicles. So that's hopefully less vehicles than we've got at the moment. And then you've got issues such as parking, which sort of cover all of those areas because they sort of influence all of them. And so that's quite a good model. And there's a good series of briefings which are there to help local authorities tackle this problem. Just to highlight some key things coming up, in only a few weeks' time, we've got a decision on the Stonehenge road scheme, which is £2 billion worth of public money, and it's not even going to safeguard the World Heritage Site. It's going to cause immense damage to it, and UNESCO are opposed to it. In the autumn, at some point, whatever the autumn is now in politics, we have a 1-year spending review that's been cut back from the 3-year spending review because of COVID, but there will be some sort of spending review. And that might give us some indications as to what government is thinking about in terms of investing in infrastructure, and it could be good or bad news. On the 9th of December, that's the Committee on Climate Change are giving their advice on the 6th carbon budget. That could be quite a key moment. It could be quite important, or it could be an anticlimax. We'll have to wait and see. And then in December and January, there should be a publication of the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, which is the plan that's been consulted on over this year. Well, the challenge that's been consulted on. We have not seen any draft, and I don't think we'll be consulted on a draft. We're just told this is it. That's going to be around about the same time as our legal challenge on the roads programme. And then further ahead next year, we've got COP26. So quite a sort of something to aim for, but whether the government is going to actually sort of show true leadership at all levels on the way to that big international conference, we shall have to wait and see. And then there's the challenge of COVID, which has really turned things upside down. I'm not going to say too much about it, but it has, seen a lot of good things happen in terms of emergency measures, low traffic neighbourhoods, cycle lanes, more space for pedestrians. It's also caused quite a bit of controversy. But it has helped people see that we don't have to accept what we've always accepted for too long on our streets. So I think, there's some good and bad in there, but it's going to be a challenge, and it's a particular challenge for public transport, and we don't know when that's going to end, or when COVID's going to end and public transport will be able to go back to where it was. And even when it does, whether people will still want to travel on it. I think certainly it's going to have lost permanently a lot of commuters because people will work who want to stay at home, but it potentially may have lost other people who no longer feel comfortable, you know, traveling on public transport. So that's going to be a challenge for us as well. Making it free might help in that challenge. And just to finish up, really, just to sort of reinforce the point that Lisa made very well, which is why we can't rely on technology. And just to give you the recent example, and we all know about the emission testing scandals that went on with Volkswagen and others, and the fixing of the figures. Well, it's still going on, and it's going on with the plug-in hybrids, where some research from Transport Environment, which came out last month, showed that real-world emissions were 2.5 times what the tests were showing. So a lot of scenarios in government forecasting are, you know, reliant on big chunks of hybrid, plug-in hybrids in the sort of vehicle mix, yet their real-world emissions are massively above what people are assuming they are. So it's another reason to be sort of skeptical of the claims of what technology can deliver. Technology is good. I love technology, and technology can solve a lot of issues, but relying on it to the point that you don't have to do anything else is very, very dangerous, and it's for these sorts of reasons. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Happy to take questions and to try and respond and answer them the best I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So now we've reached the point where